Hey, folks, this is Gary and Justin here, and we just wanted to drop in real quick up top at the beginning of this episode to give you a trigger warning. This episode does get a little uncomfortable at certain points. We already knew this guy, Jodorowsky, we're talking about is controversial, but this is perhaps the most controversial episode we're going to have with him, and it will feature an alleged rape and animal violence, lots of stuff like that. And so we want to give you a heads up on, if that's the kind of thing you don't want to hear about, then you probably may want to skip this one.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Oh, you think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys that tell you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
Hey, I'm your other host, film historian Justin Bishop, and it's just the two of us today, Gary. Mr. Todd A. Davis is not joining us on this episode. He was. You heard our little disclaimer at the beginning of this episode, our little trigger warning. Todd was kind of uncomfortable discussing some of the more problematic aspects of Alejandro Jodorowsky's history, and specifically the history regarding the filming of this movie that we'll get into. And he just kind of felt like it was best for him to bow out. So we do miss Todd, and we will have him, we'll be looking forward to seeing him on here again in the future. But for now, it's just me and Gary, like old times.
Just like the old days. Todd's actually, just to be clear, not going to join us for the rest of Jodorowsky's filmography that we're going to be discussing. So if you're a Todd Davis only fan, this is your exit ramp for a few
Does Todd Davis have an OnlyFans?
That's a good question. I don't know. He should. Todd, look into it. No, we are going to miss Todd, but it is, just to be clear up front, again, this episode does have some uncomfortable stuff, and we are not going to dodge it. Justin said right before we recorded, we try to do this thing warts and all. And so,
and there are some warts on this guy. There are some warts on this guy. But this is part 2 of our series titled Alejandro Jodorowsky, Cinema of Cruelty, a series title that could not be more fitting considering that. But we're gonna keep talking about this guy because it is an important piece of film history, and sometimes history has some ugly bits. So last week on the show, we discussed Jodorowsky's debut film, Fondo and Lis, and that film is admittedly, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. You could say that about all of Jodorowsky's movies, I think. But we did feel that it was an essential part of his story. It's a film that encompassed everything that he was as an artist up until that point, and it serves as the foundation for everything that will come after. And like all great artists, Jodorowsky had to learn to grow and to adapt. And Fondo and Lis, as we discussed, was banned in Mexico, which is where it was filmed, and where it had its first screening, one of which resulted in a literal riot, and in Jodorowsky having to flee the scene for fear of being killed by the mob that it had incited. But although very few people had the chance to see the film upon release, its notoriety enabled Jodorowsky to raise the money, about $400,000, that he needed to make another, even more provocative movie, a film that would turn the director into a cult legend and effectively launch the phenomenon of the midnight movie. And that film, the subject of today's episode, is Jodorowsky's 1970 feature, El Topo.
En este desierto viven los 4 maestros del revólver.
Y me has puesto en el polvo de la muerte. Dios mío, ¿por qué me has desamparado?
¿Me amas?
Sí.
Yo no. Para que pueda amarte tienes que ser el mejor.
Toma otra vez tu revólver.
I'm once again drinking Topo Chico.
Oh yes, of
today.
course. Was that done on purpose, or do you just like Topo Chico because it's good?
I do like Topo Chico because it's good. I can't even say it anymore. It's also because I'm confusing it with Tocopilla, because Jodorowsky once again in interviews about this movie talks about his time in Tocopilla and going to the
Chile.
cinema.
So
he said he went to the cinema every week until he was 10 years old. Every Sunday he was at the cinema, and he loved cereals. So this one reminded him of those, because he said Westerns were a big part of that. You would get these cereals. And anyway, he had no idea what America was. Just throwing that out there too, that he said that for him, this is like a fairy tale. Like, we're going to get more into it, obviously, but he thought that cowboys basically existed in fantasy land with magic and dragons and fairies.
Like not something that actually existed within history.
Right.
Interesting. So Topo Chico, so El Topo means the mole. So Topo Chico is like mole boy. Is that what Topo Chico means? Because Chico is boy, right? Or
I never thought about that.
Interesting.
But that, I guess.
Well, we are, as always, going to get into spoilers on the movie. So if this is a film that you want to watch along with us, just be warned that if you haven't seen it yet, we're going to be spoiling aspects of the story, what story there is. I don't know that you can spoil this movie necessarily, but we will be talking about specific plot points in here. So that's your spoiler warning for this week. Well, I think we should start this episode with another Jodorowsky quote, like we did last year on Fondo and Lease, or last year. It feels like a year ago. It was only a week ago, but last week on Fondo and Lease. Speaking of El Topo, Jodorowsky would say, quote, "I ask of film what most North Americans ask of psychedelic drugs. The difference being that when one creates a psychedelic film, he need not create a film that shows the visions of a person who has taken a pill. Rather, he needs to manufacture the pill." So there's going to be a lot of wacky Jodorowsky quotes. This guy's off his rocker, I'll be honest. I know we've got some listeners on the show who are big fans of this guy. I'm kind of in the middle on him. I don't like him as a dude. I do admire him as an artist. And this is, as we're going to discuss, this is a situation where you definitely have to separate the art and the artist if you want to discuss it without ignoring the behavior of the artist. But some of his quotes, man, he is just... I read this fucking thing. So one of my sources for this episode was El Topo, the book of the film. I think I sent it to you, Gary. And like the first 70 pages of the book are like basically it's just the screenplay. And then the rest of the book, it's a 160-page book. So 90 of the 160 pages are a single interview with Jodorowsky and like 5 different people interviewing him. And he just says the weirdest things throughout that. It is one of the strangest interviews I've ever read. So I've been like just picking some choice quotes from it just to show kind of how just bizarre this guy is. But I do think that, with that quote in mind, like we should, I think when we talk about El Topo, I think that this should be seen not necessarily as a story that Jodorowsky is trying to tell, but rather as the process of spiritual illumination, which this is based on how Jodorowsky describes his film. Jodorowsky is a self-proclaimed spiritual explorer, and his films reflect his own spiritual development. This guy is very into a lot of esoteric, mystical religions and practices, and we don't have time to get into all of that during this series. And quite frankly, a lot of it goes over my head, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on any of it. But in El Topo specifically, he was being influenced by his experiences with Zen Buddhism, which is we kind of mentioned in our last episode. Then when we get to the Holy Mountain, that's based in Sufism. Tusk, which we won't be talking about, deals with Hinduism and Tantrism. And then Santa Sangre is rooted in an esoteric art of Jodorowsky's own creation called psychomagic, which maybe when we get to that film, we'll talk a little bit about that. I've read a little bit about psychomagic. I've not read his book on it, but from what I've read, I don't fully understand the concept of it. So we'll see how much we can dig into that.
Boy, does he get confusing at certain times. I did get one quote that would fit here where he said, during that time, I had a fantasy that came, he's talking about obviously during the time of El Topo. He said, I had a fantasy that came from Antonin Artaud and surrealism. The fantasy that film was art, the greatest art that could ever exist. I used to ask, why is it acceptable in literature to have the Gospels, the Sutra? And why can't film be as important as a sutra or a sacred text? Why not? I use Christian symbols, Hindu symbols. I use all kinds of symbols, not as openly as I will in a holy mountain, but hidden. I needed to study to do these kinds of films. I wanted to make sacred cinema. So I started to study Oriental philosophy, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, Persian, Egyptian, Kabbalah, alchemy as well. So many things that I studied, and I am still studying. I am a student. So there's that guy.
Yeah, and all of his movies are really about spiritual illumination, about moving towards enlightenment. Like that's what his characters are. They're on a journey. And when Jodorowsky set out to make his second feature, his goal was the same as it had always been, to shock and horrify his audience, and in doing so to attempt to unlock their doors of perception to help them on their own path to enlightenment. And he took a different approach, though, this time. With El Topo, he decided to make a film that, unlike Fondo and Lis, was part of a recognizable film genre. Fondo and Lis, I don't even know what film genre. I don't know how you would classify that as a genre. But this time he's decided, I'm going to make a Western. He's like, Americans didn't watch Fondo and Lis, and Americans love cowboys, so I'm going to make a movie about cowboys. But, what he really did was he made a film that on the surface appears to be a typical Western, because by what he was able to do is by positioning himself more directly in a genre that was popular with the movie going public, he gave his art the full potential to be seen by the masses. More people were going to be willing to see it if it looked like they were going to see a Western. So by pretending to obey the conventions of the genre, he was able to more easily gain favor with the public, which only made it easier to demolish their expectations once they actually saw the film.
Now, you'll hear like certain interviews with him where he sounds like, or he tries to make it sound like, at least like, I set out to just do a Western, but I couldn't. I just can't do that. Like, I don't know. That's definitely in the commentary. Like at the very start of it, he's like, I just wanted to do a Western.
Yeah,
but I can't
have a hard time.
Normal film.
I have a hard time buying that. I think he wrote a script.
Yeah,
and this movie is definitely not. The story is nothing like a typical Western. So
yeah, maybe he means at the early stages. He was maybe I can do a Western, like like the serials he used to watch or something.
Right. Well, he's certainly not the first filmmaker to subvert the mythology of the West. The Western is, we haven't really talked about many Westerns on this film, or on this podcast. I think the only one we've done is The Quick and the Dead, right? Yeah, and even The Quick and the Dead is kind of it's very much a revisionist Western. It's very much playing with the conventions of the genre in very different ways than this does. But, the Western is one of those film genres that is like very specifically American, more so than almost any other Western, except maybe the gangster movie you could throw in there as well.
For what it's worth, I did wonder what Sam Raimi thought of Jodorowsky, but I can't find him talking about him. I'm just curious.
I don't know. I bet he doesn't like him. It's like, this is too much, dude. But other filmmakers by the time El Topo was being made had already started to kind of subvert the tropes of the Western. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch did it to some extent. That came out the same year as El Topo. Not to mention, of course, the spaghetti Westerns of Sergio Leone, Sergio Corbucci, guys like that, who were taking this distinctly American thing, this American myth of the cowboy, and kind of turning it on its head. And I think that when he made this movie, I haven't found any evidence of this in interviews, but I do think that Jodorowsky was intentionally bringing to mind the imagery of the spaghetti Western when he set out to make this movie.
There's definitely points, where he'll describe influences that are in the movie, from John Wayne to he directly talks about in some places like the spaghetti western and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it's with the general that like he tried to make that kind of a standoff, but instead of being so gruff, it's more of a dance, you know. So he's trying to, I guess, a little bit subvert that, but definitely influenced by the spaghetti western for sure.
Right, of course. And the guy, you know, the guys that we're talking about, like Sam Peckinpah, like Sergio Leone, they hope to break from the polished west of classic Hollywood movie westerns, like the John Wayne movies, by introducing, you know, nihilism and amoral behavior into the genre. It became a little bit more mean-spirited, I guess you would say. But they still use the landmarks of the West. You know, you've got your cowboys going on horseback through the canyons and things like that, and the plains. They use all this stuff that you see in all these other westerns, but Jodorowsky really didn't have any intention of giving his audience something so familiar to cling on to.
He made an acid western.
Yeah, an acid western is kind of this kind of was the beginning of that. That's a very like sub genre, I guess, the acid western. But then there were a couple that were released around the time, like in the couple years after this movie. But Pauline Kael, the famed, you know, film critic, she actually coined the term acid western, using it to describe this film derogatively, if I remember correctly. And it was actually Jonathan Rosenbaum who wrote the book Midnight Movies, or co-wrote the book Midnight Movies, who kind of referred to the acid western as a subgenre of its own later on down the line. So he's kind of the one who established it as a quote unquote genre. So we discussed this a little bit during Fondo and Lease, I think, but all of Jodorowsky's films are actually shot in chronological order, which is highly unusual because for him, the creation of the film itself is a large part and an important part of Jodorowsky's own personal journey. The film basically, to hear it from him, the film creation acts as his own path towards enlightenment. And he also says that he always begins filming with a ritual of some sort. So in the case of El Topo, the first shot that was filmed was the ritual burial of the teddy bear that was owned by El Topo's son, which happened to be the teddy bear owned by Jodorowsky's own son. And in fact, the child in the movie is played by Jodorowsky's son, Brontis Jodorowsky. So Brontis Jodorowsky is the first of 5 children that Alejandro would have from 3 different women. Brontis's mother was a French actress named Bernadette Landru. Landru separated from Jodorowsky while she was still pregnant. And according to Jodorowsky, when Brontis was born, his mother took him away. Those were Jodorowsky's words. And when she did so, as a kind of going away gift, Jodorowsky gifted his son a toy teddy bear. So years later, Jodorowsky, he's trying to kind of make amends with some of his past relationships, and he begins to ask the mothers of his children for custody so that he can raise the kids, because he's been kind of an absent father. He's kind of abandoned his children, and 2 of the women, including Landru, obliged. And at the age of 7, Brontis Jodorowsky came to live with his father, and when he arrived, he still had that toy teddy bear with him that had been given to him as a gift from his father. So when they began filming, Jodorowsky put a picture of Brontis's mother in an antique frame and told his son, "You must bury your mother's picture and your bear." So what you're seeing on the film with them burying the bear and burying that picture, that's Brontis's actual mother, Jodorowsky's ex-wife, and they're actually burying it and leaving it in the desert. So what you're seeing on the film is, in fact, the reality of what's going on during the filming of it.
I think in Fondo Elise, he had a wife that was in one of the scenes, and I can't remember what her name there was.
Valerie, I think.
Was that Valerie?
I think it's Valerie. Yeah. She was the naked lady towards the beginning.
Yeah.
And I said that Brontis's mother was his wife. I honestly don't know if they were married or not. I'm not sure about that.
He says this whole thing is semi-autobiographical. He literally, like in one interview, says like he hadn't seen his son in 7 years. This is a quote. He said his mother got pregnant and moved to Europe. And when I say in the film, "Today you turned 7," it was his actual birthday. He carries a bear I gave to his mother before she left for him. It's a bear of childhood. The photo is a picture of his mom. It was traumatic for him seeing his bear buried, but I only cared about the film. I didn't care about his feelings. Now, besides the fact that he's put his kid on there naked and he's buried his bear, I was looking for some sympathy. And he does say, years later, I had to correct my mistake by giving him a bear and saying, and then he pauses and then he says, "Well, I did this in a book." in there, I gave him a bear and apologized.
So not in real life.
So like not even in real life,
just in a book, because Jodorowsky has written quite a few like autobiographical novels and autobiographies. Like his later ones, The Dance of Reality and Endless Poetry, are about his time as a child and an adolescent young adult in Chile. And Brontes actually becomes an actor. I mean, he continues to act after this. He does a lot of stage work, I think, but he has done some films. And when Jodorowsky made film versions of The Dance of Reality and Endless Poetry, Brontes actually stars in them and plays Jodorowsky's father, plays Jaime Jodorowsky in them, and he's really good. He's a really fantastic actor. He is very, very good in them. He hasn't been in a lot of other stuff that people have seen, but oddly enough, he pops up in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. He plays Nicholas Flamel in that, which is such a weird bit of casting. Like somebody had to have, I mean, I guess he could have just auditioned for it, but
that feels like something somebody would have sought him out, or something.
Right? It feels that way, but I don't know the story behind that, so I'm not sure. But he does continue to be an actor into adulthood and still an actor to this day, I believe. I mean, I guess so, because Dance of Reality and Endless Poetry were like 2013, 2014, so not that long ago.
Yeah, I think his daughter too is like a musician or something. And
his daughter's a musician, and one of his other sons is going to star in Santa Sangre as well. So he likes to cast family members in his movies and himself. In fact, speaking of which, Jodorowsky himself does play the title role of El Topo, the mole, as we said earlier. But the rest of the cast, not everyone, but most of the rest of the cast is comprised of mostly non-actors, just like he had done in Fondo and Lise. So recognizable faces here. Oh, you're going to ask about Star Trek?
Well, no, I was just going to say Todd picked a fine time that nobody's going to be in Star Trek. So
because nobody, I don't think anyone in any of these movies would show up in Star Trek anyway. So
I did want to point out that to Jodorowsky, El Topo was a god of vengeance, but he says for that character, he was inspired by rabbis, by Zorro, and by Elvis Presley. He said, I watched an Elvis film in France where he was despised, but he wore that black leather, and I wanted that too.
He also got that idea for the black leather from I can't recall the guy's name, but some musician that he had spoken with. It was somebody who was semi-famous, I guess. No, it wasn't Elvis. It was another guy that he was going to like work with this guy, either like directing a stage show or maybe putting him in one of his movies. But this guy always wore black leather, like head to toe. And I looked up pictures of him, and he is dressed exactly like El Topo minus the hat.
Nice.
Like
well,
black leather pants, leather vest, black shirt.
I think casting was tough too, because everything they changed, like he said, when they changed like locations or like the script would change or something. So stuff just was too difficult to pin down exactly. He said he didn't intend to actually even be the lead in the film. He wanted an actor, and he said, I wanted an actor who'd dye their hair, grow a beard, shave it off, etc. All the stuff that El Topo goes through. But he said no Mexican actor would do it because almost all of them had other gigs, especially in TV. So he was finally just had to settle in and say, okay, I'm the only one who's going to do this.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. Recognizable faces in the cast are rare, but there are a few characters who are played by working actors, some of who have had successful careers. One of those is a guy named Alfonso Arau, who plays Bandito number 1. I think Bandito number 1 is the guy who's into shoes, like the guy who starts like sticking the shoes in his mouth. So he had already had a small role in The Wild Bunch, actually, which had filmed a year earlier. And he'd probably be most well known as El Guapo in The Three Amigos, which was, 15, 16 years after this. But he plays El Guapo in that, which I thought was a weird piece of trivia. And then more recently, he voiced Papa Julio in Pixar's Coco, which I am assuming is the only Disney connection we're going to have during this series. Unless you take this quote from Jodorowsky where he says, I think Spielberg is the son from when Walt Disney fucked Minnie Mouse.
That sounds like Jodorowsky.
It sure does.
So the foot fetish thing, it comes from Buñuel.
Yeah, I read that somewhere, but I wasn't sure what it was referencing.
He said he had a fetish for women's shoes.
Oh, I thought it was from a Buñuel movie. So it's from Buñuel himself?
Yeah, he said that Manuel had a fetish for women's shoes, so I exaggerated a little bit and had him sucking on a shoe.
Yeah,
And,
he sure does. He does that.
That guy Alfonso Araujo, it does have a pretty impressive resume when you go like look into him deep. Like he's world traveled, like he's like in Russia, Japan, and like all over the place working it. He'd already directed his first film in 1969. And so then he goes on, he starts doing this stuff like acting, but he finally directs the film called Like Water for Chocolate in 1992.
Oh yeah, he directed that.
Yeah, which was pretty damn successful.
Yeah,
won like something like 44 awards.
Yeah, I've never seen it, but I'm very aware of the movie, but I don't think I've ever watched it.
It's based on a novel that his wife wrote. I think it won Audience Choice and Best Screenplay.
Wow.
And I think that was the Chicago International Film Festival. Mexico has the Ariel Awards, which is basically like their Oscars, and it won the year it came out, won like Best Picture, Best Screenplay, Best Directing, Best Actor, etc. It cleaned up over there. And he was even, I think it was nominated at the Golden Globes for Best Foreign Language Film. He also directed A Walk in the Clouds with Keanu Reeves.
Did he really? Man, I didn't look into him as far as you did. I just looked at his acting resume. That's wild.
He also directed this movie called Picking Up the Pieces that I literally don't think I had ever heard of before this, but it stars that comedian Eddie Griffin, names like Elliot Gould, but then check this: Woody Allen, David Schwimmer, Sharon Stone, Cheech Marin, Kiefer Sutherland, Andy Dick, Fran Drescher, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Lou Diamond Phillips.
What?
All of this movie.
Wow.
And, the synopsis of it I found was: a small New Mexican village discovers a severed hand that is considered a miracle of God, but it actually belongs to a murdered spouse with a husband in search of it.
Well, it's called Picking Up the Pieces.
Picking Up the Pieces.
Okay, that's wild. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. Cheech Marin says it's the quote worst film I've ever made.
Well, I just looked it up on IMDb, and it is at a solid 4.7 out of 10. So maybe I won't look that one up. Maybe I won't bother with that. David Schwimmer. Did you say David Schwimmer?
I did say David Schwimmer.
Yeah. What a hell of a cast, though.
I know it's a bunch of freaking people in there. I don't know what's
Sharon Stone, Jesus.
So it's no Star Trek, but anyway, that's Bandito 1.
So
I wanted to mention too, just real quick, David Silva plays the general. He was he had started in like 1937 in a movie called Beneath the Sky of Mexico. He acted, I think, up until like 1977. He passed in 76, but he had movies coming out till 77. He's been in like 124 films.
I know in one interview I saw Jodorowsky describe him as like Errol Flynn, and then he says that he got fat and lost his hair and was not as big of a star anymore once that happened. He got old, basically.
Yeah, he was a leading man, especially in the 40s. And but yeah, when Jodorowsky, he says he dug him up, and then after El Topo, he took off again. But yeah, he had gotten older and fatter or whatever, and so nobody was calling. But in that Ariel Awards thing, again, like the Oscars, he won Best Actor like 3 times and Best Supporting Actor once. None of those for El Topo, by the way.
No, he's got a pretty small role in this, although it's significant, but as far as screen time goes, it's not very long.
Well, Jodorowsky seems to love that character too, the general, because he says he said I always hated dictators, and I always thought I had created this character based on Pinochet, which was impossible because the movie happened before Pinochet came into power, but he describes Pinochet as the most hateful character I can think of. He's dreadful, more hateful than Hitler, more than Mussolini or Stalin, because Pinochet is dumb. He once said, if I find a poet in the street, I will punch him in the face. That's the kind of monster he was. He was anti-culture, and it's shameful. For those that don't know, and I didn't before all this, but Pinochet was a Chilean leader who seized power in a coup on September 11th, 1973. And he was like a ruler over Chile from 74 to 1990.
Oh, wow. I know I'd heard the name, but I'm not familiar with the history. So thank you, Gary, for that history lesson.
You're welcome. Who says this thing is not educational.
So besides El Topo himself, I think the film's most prominent role is probably the character named Mara, or La Mujer, the woman, which is a character played by a woman named Mara Lorenzio. According to Jodorowsky, and we do have to preface this again, take this with a grain of salt, because I think Jodorowsky is kind of full of shit a lot of times, and I think he just makes up. I think he likes to write his own legend and the legend surrounding his films a lot. So, because you'll read one interview, he'll say one thing, and another interview, he'll say something that completely contradicts that. So everything that comes out of his mouth, I feel like you kind of have to take with a grain of salt, including the story of how he met Mara Lorenzio. He says that the way he describes it is like she just showed up at his door one day. He says that she, here's a quote, she was in bad shape. At one time in her life, she had taken LSD in great quantities and had suffered. She had been in a hospital for mental illness. I said, I will make a film with you. You will have a starring role. And that's how she got cast in El Topo.
I guess it's not that much different. I put this here because for the commentary, he also says when she first appears, that outfit she's in with the hat and the trench coat,
the long
thing.
dress, yeah.
Yeah. He says, this woman is not an actress. He never even says her name, which irritates me for where this goes. But he never even says her name. He says he doesn't know her name. He says, this woman is not an actress. I found her in Mexico City's Zona Rosa, dressed like that. She made her own clothes. She had taken 500 tabs of LSD and she was out of her mind. I never even knew her name. She was either English or American. I didn't even know her nationality. She didn't speak Spanish. She made the film and then disappeared. I dubbed her voice using a 50-year-old woman to make it deeper.
Yeah, he does that a lot. Like in reading that interview, specifically the one in the Book of El Topo, like when he talks about a lot of the actors and actresses in the film, he doesn't he doesn't refer to any of them by name, hardly. It doesn't seem like. He just kind of describes them as, he describes her as the blonde woman, describes the next lady that comes, the girl that's in all black is like the dark-haired woman. Like he never says any of their names. I don't know if he just doesn't know or doesn't care enough to learn them. I'm not sure. It's kind of strange. But again, he's a guy. He's a strange dude. So this was, if you look at her, Maria Lorenzio up on IMDb, this seems to be her only screen acting role, and that may be with good reason. And I guess this is a good point to put in a second trigger warning here, because this is where we can't talk about El Topo and talk about Jodorowsky without mentioning the controversy surrounding one scene in particular. If you're familiar with Jodorowsky, then I'm sure, and you know exactly where this is going. If you're not familiar with Jodorowsky, just be warned that this is kind of some uncomfortable territory that we're getting into.
And we'll try to be delicate here because we're two dudes just talking about this. But
right. But we'll get into our reasons why we think that we need to at least mention it here in a minute. But basically, following the release of the film, and this is also, by the way, in that Book of El Topo, this is where that quote originally came from. Jodorowsky claimed that the rape scene with Mara was unsimulated. He basically said, I've got the full quote from him here. I don't think I'm going to read the full quote because it just is, I don't like hearing those words coming from my own mouth. So basically what he says, though, is that he tells her that he's going to rape her. He says that we're going to go into the desert. There's two other people. He says a photographer, which I assume he means the cinematographer, and a technician. I don't know what that means, a sound guy or something. I'm not sure. He said no one else was there. It was basically the two of them in the desert and two technicians. And he said, I'm not going to rehearse because there's only going to be one take. And then he says that he really raped her. He says, I really raped her, and she screamed, is his quote. And yeah,
that's the part I thought you were going to skip.
Well, yeah, and then I did it anyway for some reason, because I hate myself, I guess. But you can see why this statement could be controversial. It's weird reading it in the context of that interview because the interviewers never call him out on it. It's very strange. But also reading that interview, I sent you some bizarre quotes from it as I was reading it, and the interviewers in it seem to be just hanging on to every word that he says, like he's some kind of
some weird,
he's some kind of fucking
charisma.
guru. Yeah. And they don't ever question him on that or ever go wait, man, that's fucked up. What did you just say? They don't say anything like that. They just keep going on with the interview. But this quote, it's been kind of following him for his entire career since then. But in the wake of the Me Too movement, this quote resurfaced just as the El Museo del Barrio in New York City, art museum, they were planning a retrospective exhibit on Jodorowsky's work. This is in 2019. And when they were planning that, this quote kind of resurfaced, and they canceled the whole thing that they'd been working on for like 2 or 3 years. They just canceled it, which I think was not a bad decision on their part. I think they did exactly what they should have done. In response, after this thing got canceled, this exhibit got canceled, he says, and I will read this quote beginning to end. He says basically what he's saying is that what I said in that interview in the 70s was a publicity stunt. That's what he's kind of saying. And here's his exact statement. They were words, not facts, surrealist publicity in order to enter the world of cinema from a position of obscurity. I do not condone the act of rape, but exploited the shock value of the statement at the time, following years in the panic movement and other iterations of harnessing shock to motivate energetic release. I acknowledge that this statement is problematic in that it presents fictional violence against a woman as a tool for exposure, and now, 50 years later, I regret that this is being read as truth. My practice is centered on healing and love. I invite further dialogue in the spirit of progress. It should also be noted that well before that controversy in 2019, there had been multiple interviews over the years where he had changed his account of what happened, saying that he never raped her or that he made the statement just to shock the interviewers. Gary, you said, though, that I didn't listen to the commentary, but you said in the commentary he doubles down on it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I have the quote for the point that he starts talking about it. And it really, he just jumps right into it and right back out of it. But it's from the point that she's saying like nothing, like circling him. He references some director, and then he just starts talking about it randomly. And I say that because the guy is just like, there's like no time to digest what he's saying sometimes. Like he just, and even with something as intense as this, it's just like almost like he brushes it off. Mm-hmm. And I don't, and so it's what makes it so weird to hear like him say something and then he deny it later. And anyway, here's the quote. Here's what he says. He says, he teaches her how to perform miracles. She doesn't know how. She thinks the world holds nothing for her. She is dependent on him. She thinks the world is a void. El Topo will have to instruct her, but he has to do so with violence because she respects power and enjoys humiliation, just as with the general. This rape was authentic. I really hit her. It's all real. It looks spectacular, or looks less spectacular than a choreographed one. I tore those clothes for real, and that's why it was harder to do. This was my time of chauvinism. Now I've changed. I found a woman who has completely tamed me. In those days, my vision of women was different. I built that stone-like phallus. I always said it was a portrait of my sex. I said, make it short, but thick. So it's like he goes right into a joke, like right after that. He's talking about the fucking stolen phallus. So that's why I read that whole thing, because that's literally his train of discussion as he's going through it. And he just throws like, by the way, authentic rape, like right in the middle of the fucking conversation, which drove me nuts. And then I'm like, and then he makes a joke, talks about, found it. That was my time of chauvinism. Now I've changed. I found a woman who's tamed me. Not like an apology or anything. Right. He's just like, yeah, I was crazy back then. I don't know. I'm less wacky now.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't quite. I mean, and that the quote that I read, his statement from 2019, does read a lot like it was written by a publicist. It doesn't sound like any other quote that I've ever read from Jodorowsky. It sounds like it was written by somebody who was trying to do damage control, is what it sounds like to me.
That's how I felt too.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's no way to know what the truth here is necessarily. The only people that really know and could really say are probably Jodorowsky himself, and he has contradicted himself both ways multiple times, or the woman, Mara. And to my knowledge, she's never spoken about it publicly. And obviously, if he did really rape her, which he has claimed at least twice that he did, that is fucking despicable, and he should be in jail. And obviously, we would never do anything but condemn that kind of behavior. It's very easy to think that he was just saying this to be sensationalist, because that's what he does. He says a lot of stuff just to be sensational, especially back in this time frame. But that's not the kind of thing you fucking joke about. Even if you're just saying it to get a rise out of the interviewers, that's not the way to do it. Say something else. Say, there are other ways that you can come across as edgy. Before we were recording, Gary, you said that you described him as like, this guy's been an edgelord his entire life, and that is 100% accurate. That's before that term was ever existed. That's exactly what he's fucking doing.
Yeah, so it's easy to think that like maybe he didn't actually rape someone, and it would be a thing that he would say. At the same time, I look at that and I'm like, and you said this, it's not fucking funny. Like, why would that be the thing you say to this person? And I don't know, and it just drives me crazy. Even like the fact that you could just have a conversation and you should so casually drop it in the middle of something you're talking about, and then just move on and make a joke and like laugh about it. And he does laugh, like he's laughing a lot of the times during a lot of these things. And like, it's like, that's the kind of guy who could rape somebody. And it's like, so it's hard to say. And as far as I know, or whatever, if that's her name, even disappeared. Like she just, nobody even talks to her. It's not like, even if she could give a statement, who even knows if she's even alive to this day? And
right.
it's just like, it's
50
kind of
years ago.
What a weird fucking story to like say that and then try to take it back later. This woman's gone. Nobody knows anything about her. And it's just like, it's sick. It did completely jade my perception of the guy. He just seems like a piece of shit.
Yeah, because coming off of Fondo and Lease, you were kind of like, this guy, his stuff, might not be for everybody. It might not even be for me, but you were intrigued enough to want to know more, basically, right? And now, and some of his eccentric statements were just like amusing in that kind of way, like, oh, this guy's wacky. Listen to these weird things he's saying. But then you're like, oh, maybe this guy's just a fucking piece of shit, like maybe that's who he actually is. And the thing is, and we had a discussion with Todd when he decided he didn't want to continue on this journey, which we respect. What I kind of explained was that, like, I don't think that we can't ignore the parts of history that are ugly. And unfortunately, like with the case of El Topo, if you're talking about the history of cult films and you're talking about the history of the Midnight Movie, this is where that begins. The modern concept of a cult film begins here. The modern concept of a Midnight Movie begins here. And we weren't going to talk about El Topo without mentioning this, because that would be disrespectful to the victim. To pretend that it never happened is disrespectful to the victim. So I think that it's something that does need to be discussed, and we're going to move on from it here in a moment, but I just want to mention why we decided that we're going to throw this into the middle of an episode about a movie is because when we do these deep dives into filmmakers on this show, we do want it to be warts and all. We are not like just kissing the feet of these filmmakers. Now, there are some guys like Sam Raimi. We couldn't find a bad thing about that guy. Some of these guys are genuinely good. Some of them are pieces of shit. Some of them are, but nobody that we've talked about so far has done anything as despicable as what Jodorowsky has claimed that he did. But again, ignoring it doesn't change the fact that it happened. And I think ignoring it, in fact, is problematic in its own right, because it does need to be acknowledged that this guy did a horrible thing. And honestly, he should have gone to jail for it if he did, in fact, do what he claims.
Yeah, and it's tough because you're this guy who likes to say all kinds of bullshit all the time, and so like for us to have to decipher which thing is accurate and which thing is not, I don't know. I mean, the reason I'm still here, and like Todd, I believe in being able to separate the art from the artist. I've had to do it a number of times. I mean, but I Todd didn't want to do that, and I have respected that for people. There were people that, I mean, listen, I usually think I'm the more hardcore about it. I think Kanye West is one of the greatest rappers of all time, and as far as I know, as of this recording, he's still become a massive Hitler stan. So I don't know what the fuck with that guy. I don't like anything he's doing right now. I still recognize that I loved his music,
Right. And I mean, Rosemary's Baby is one of the greatest films of all time. Absolutely. One of the greatest horror films of all time, one of the films period of all time. And it was made by a man who is who sexually molested, raped, statutory rape, an underage girl. Fact. That's a fucking fact. And Roman Polanski's a piece of shit who should not be allowed to make movies. That doesn't mean that Rosemary's Baby isn't an achievement as a piece of art. And I think in the case of that, you can praise the film and the technique without praising the person who did it. Now, some people can't separate the art from the artist, and I think that's fine too. I think if you can't watch Roman Polanski movies anymore, or you can't watch Woody Allen movies anymore, or you can't watch Jodorowsky movies anymore, then that is your decision. I fully respect that. I'm never going to tell somebody like, oh yeah, but you should separate the art from the artist. Some people can do that and some people can't. And that's just the way that people approach art. It is. Everyone comes from it from their own experiences, their own point of view, the way they experience the world around them, including art. And some people just can't do that. And if you can't do that, fuck, that's fine. Then don't watch those movies if that makes you feel comfortable. I fully believe that. And if you go on Letterboxd and find, reviews of this movie, you're going to find a lot of like 1-star reviews that people specifically cannot watch this movie because of that bit of information.
Yeah, they think it's just disgusting, and for good reason. But yeah, I'm with you. Like I would never tell anybody they have to watch something or they're wrong for being triggered by something. I left the trigger warning, by the way, purposefully vague at the top of the show, just because another aspect of this movie includes animal death, and that's another trigger. And I'm not trying to equate the two or do anything like that, so don't get me wrong. I'm just saying things hit people different. And so I know my wife cannot stand animal violence of any kind, and
even fake.
Even fake. And
like if a dog dies, like John Wick, like the dog dies. That's a really hard thing for a lot of people to watch. My wife has a hard time watching that scene. Yeah, even though she loves the John Wick movies, she will walk out of the room during that, even though you don't see anything.
Cannibal Holocaust still disgusts me because
that movie's fucked up anyway.
Anyway, so. We don't know what really happened here, but I have no sympathy for the guy right now. Right. Because he doesn't seem, I can't tell that he even takes it seriously, even if he didn't do it. Like, it just seems like, I don't know. Like the guy, edgelord's the only way I know to do it, to talk about him. Like even other than rapist, like if he is a rapist, but then edgelord's like he just says some stupid shit sometimes, and you're like, what? I don't know. At first, it went from like cute to like now. Sometimes it feels sinister every once in a while.
Yeah, it's really strange, man. That like interview that in that book that I keep referencing. There are moments in it, and I don't know where it's coming from, but he's like, he'll be talking about something, and he'll just go on this tangent, and it's all gobbledygook. It's all a bunch of like weird, like him just stream of consciousness, like verbal diarrhea, but his verbal diarrhea happens to reference a lot of like Sufism and Buddhism and all these other isms. And then he'll go just at the end of the paragraph, he'll just go like, I love Doctor Strange comics. And then he'll just move on. And it's like, where did that, like, that's an actual quote in one of the paragraphs. He just ends it with, I love Doctor Strange comics. And I'm like, either this guy's got like, I don't know, some Tourette's type issue, or he's like Brick from Anchorman, where he's just like seeing things in the room where he's sitting with these interviewers, because he says, I love the yellow dog at one point. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Are you just Brick, are you just pointing at things in the room and saying that you love them? Like, that's what it feels like, that scene from Anchorman. But it's, I don't know, man. I can't get and I've read so many goddamn interviews with this guy, and I cannot get a handle on him at all.
Well, no, I mean, there's a section that we're going to have towards, because I watched the commentary for the film, and I struggled to be like, where am I going to put some of this stuff? And then finally I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save it till I get prompted. And I literally made a note that you let this guy talk long enough and just shit comes out. And I was like, I could just read random quotes that Jodorowsky makes.
Yeah.
So we'll get there, but that's how he is. And I had the exact same thought as you, by the way, that I was like, at first when we started Fondo Elise, I thought this guy might be like the weird fucking guy at the party that you're like, what is this dude talking about? Right. That's crazy, man. Are you drunk? Like, how high are you or whatever? And then now it's like, I feel like he might be the friend that he's either the friend that's like, you're like, this motherfucker is always lying about some shit.
He's
like,
just making shit up.
Making shit up to be cool.
Like he's clearly very well read, and he has clearly studied all of this stuff, and it's just like, oh, dude, shut the fuck up. Like, that's what I feel like listening to him. I was like, just shut the fuck up, really. Like, you're not making any sense. I know you sound smart to you, but to everyone else, you sound like a nut job.
Right.
Anyway, we'll move on, but we needed to acknowledge that because it is unfortunately a big part of the story of the making of this movie. Now, as was the case with Fondo and Lise, we don't have a lot of information about the actual process of filming El Topo. There were no like behind the scenes camera crews or anyone who was like documenting the making of the movie. So the best thing we have are the things that Jodorowsky has mentioned in interviews over the year, which, as we've just noted, cannot be relied upon. So some of this could just be bullshit. For example, in one interview, he notes that El Topo wears, you don't see this in the movie. So like as he's filming this, he's wearing black silk underwear with 2 holes cut in them. One to expose his balls and one to expose just the tip of his penis. And then he also painted a green circle around the butthole. So there's that.
So that's good information to have. That'll be on the quiz later.
Yeah. Or this other anecdote that he says, where he says the river that El Topo crosses wasn't in a desert, but was actually in a mine, and the water had traces of cyanide in it. So after the scene was shot, the crew members had to take Jodorowsky's shoes off and wash his feet, which he described as a very religious moment. Because this guy, I mean, El Topo, the character, is very much like a Christ figure at times in this. And sometimes I feel like Jodorowsky sees himself that way as well.
He definitely seems like the guy you could believe that. I know he definitely refers to himself as like, or refers to El Topo as like kind of a Moses figure too.
Yeah.
Well,
the whole thing
coming
in
from
the desert,
stone.
like, yeah, the water from the stone and him like turning the water from bitter to sweet. That's all from the story of Moses. And in fact, he said that of the filming of the movie, he would say, quote, there was no difference between filming and reality. It was a very religious trip. So he sees this whole thing as like this metaphysical journey of the self. He also said, quote, again, when I direct a film, everybody, myself included, falls into such trances that there is dead silence because our lives are at stake. And that's the kind of quote where I'm like, shut the fuck up. Exactly. That's the kind of quote that I'm like, God, dude, you're making a fucking movie. I mean, this is at the end of the day, you're making a movie. Because he even talks like how he had never ridden a horse before this, like he had never touched a horse before this movie. And he says that like during the scenes when we're filming, the horse does everything I wanted to do, but once the cameras start rolling, it would buck me off. I'm like, I don't think that probably didn't happen at all. Like you probably practiced riding a horse for a while before filming the movie, and the horse doesn't know when the camera's rolling. The horse doesn't know what the word action means. In some cases, though, where he says our lives were at stake, this was literal, at least in one case, because that suspended bridge that we see El Topo on, you know, it's like really high, and you see him climb like on the edge of it and like hold his arms out kind of, and you can see how high up they are. That wasn't a bridge that they built. They didn't build any sets for this, I don't think, or hardly any. That was something they just found, and a lot of the wood was rotting. So Jodorowsky and the woman, the dark-haired woman, who is, I can't remember her character's name. She's kind of dressed like El Topo, the woman in black. You know, they're both on that bridge, and they were very much in danger when standing on it because there was a 900-meter drop below it, and this wood's just rotting, and they're just out in the middle of nowhere with no safety precautions in place. They found a lot of sets like that, though, like the Western town where some of the scenes, the town at the end of the movie, in the second half of the movie, that was in the middle of the desert. And according to Jodorowsky, it was a set that had been built for a Western, an American Western movie starring Glenn Ford, you know, Pa Kent from the Superman movies, that had been abandoned. So they just found it and decided to use it. And I don't know if that's true.
Day of the Evil God is supposedly.
Is that what he says? Because in the interview I read, he said The Law of Tombstone, which is not a movie. There's a movie called The Law West of Tombstone, but that came out in like the 30s and definitely did have Glenn Ford in it because Glenn Ford would have been a child at that time.
Yeah, Day of the Evil God is from 68, so that
makes a lot more sense because that was like a year before they filmed this. So that would make sense considering the shape that it's in. Which, I mean, that's kind of cool that they just found this abandoned town in the middle of the desert, and we're able to use it. It's kind of neat. But there's a lot of weird little anecdotes like this, like for the scene where the older women with the younger black man, the guy who's like the slave and having to like wait on them in their dressing room. Jodorowsky said they kept having issues shooting the scene because the guy kept getting a boner, which amused the old women. He also says that one woman with the big scar on her arm, he said that she got that because a like 900-pound iron crucifix fell on her arm when she was a child, which is probably also bullshit. For the scene where the deformed people from the mountain that he lives with, when they're getting killed, he threw watermelons at them, which you can tell if you know that when you're watching that scene. He had to use the watermelons for the gore in that, because at that point they had run out of fake blood and run out of money to buy more. So he just threw watermelons at people, like chunks of watermelon. But then when he did have the fake blood, like earlier in the filming, for the squibs, he used condoms, which is not unusual, I guess. I'm sure lots of low budget movies have done that. So he used condoms filled with fake blood, about which he said, when the quote, "When the sacks are broken to get the effect, every wound is a phallus that explodes. For me, this is very beautiful." Yeah. All right, Jodo. whatever you say, dude. Let's see what else. So the two guys that we need, the two double amputees, one without legs, one without arms, like the crippled masters that Todd loves so much. They're strapped to each other. Jodorowsky says that he recreated a costume that John Wayne had worn in a movie. I'm not sure what movie. I don't even know if he knows, because he just found a picture in an encyclopedia of film and recreated it for them to wear. So like the big wide chaps that they're wearing and the hat. Also, they apparently hated each other, those two guys. So they were fighting and bickering the whole time.
Yeah, and he really made them climb that ladder, and he said that was like a whole day process.
Well, yeah, that looks very difficult. How could that not? That could not be easy.
He definitely in the commentary says 2 cripples make one John Wayne. That is a quote from Jodorowsky.
Wow. All right. And then in the scene where Jodorowsky comes to, I think it's the third master, because he's got the 4 masters he has to fight. The third one has this like rabbit farm. You see a lot of rabbits hopping around. Then there are a whole lot of dead rabbits. Originally, he had wanted like 10,000 rabbits to come stampeding over a hill like a cattle in an old Western, but he couldn't find 10,000 rabbits. So he said he found about 300 of them. And for the scenes where they're dead, according to the interview that I read, he says that he killed them himself. He says that he karate chopped them in the neck, which seems like an odd way to do it. But he says it's the most humane way to do it. But he says that nobody else would do it, so he personally killed the rabbits himself. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But who the fuck knows with this guy?
I'd seen an interview like that with him too, and said like the other people were so upset by it, but he made his son do one or two or something like that, just because that's part of being a man, or something stupid, some stupid fucking shit like that. Yeah. This guy obviously, like, I have no problem making fun of this guy now, so that's good. That's freeing. But I will say, in the commentary of the film, he makes it clear, like, that he was like, people were so upset with me for like killing all these animals. He was like, I didn't kill any of these animals. He says that he bought all these animals from a slaughterhouse. They were all like condemned to death. They all had like disease or something, and they were getting killed anyway. And then he bought them and did everything.
That's honestly probably more accurate, because the interview I read where he says that he karate chopped them is in that same one in the book of El Topo, where it is 90 pages of him just spouting off a bunch of bullshit. I mean, that's where the rape confession originated.
This is fucking dumb in the commentary. I'm like, oh, so you backed off the animal thing.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But you're not backing
off
the rape. Like, what is your problem, dude?
Yeah, yeah. And anyway, I mean, there's a lot of, I could go on and on, because there's a lot of these kind of stories that he gives in interviews, and I don't know. I think some of them, if not most of them, are probably bullshit. But at least they're, entertaining to read, because it's like, what the fuck with this guy, and like we said, print the legend, because in the case of Jodorowsky, he's making his own legend, and you never know what's true and what isn't with this guy. Do you have any other ones from the commentary that I might not have come across in the interviews I read? Any other little anecdotes about the filming at all?
Well, I'd be happy to scroll through some commentary notes. I won't do all the quotes yet, but let's look for some interesting fun facts about the film. there was a demand on set. I saw this separately, so this was not in the commentary. That in the contracts of all the actresses, there was a clause stating that they had to not sleep with the director.
Yeah, I saw that in a couple places too.
I was like, what? I don't know. That just popped up for me here. Artist Vicente Rojo did the title sequences and the chapters there. He painted like Jodo's hands and stuff like that. But I just thought that was an interesting little side note. There was when Jodo first rolls up into town, or Topo first rolls up into town, there's the woman on the stake. He says, we put her there with a ladder, no special effects. I almost killed her. We left her up there so long.
Wait, no special effects, then how is she impaled?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Unless it's I don't know.
Maybe he just means like they were separated the thing and she was just hanging up there or something.
Like kind of like Cannibal Holocaust style, the lady who's impaled, where she was sitting on like a bicycle seat or something.
Right.
With a thing coming out of her mouth.
Maybe he's thinking like CG or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we didn't have CG back then, Mr. Jodorowsky.
The women that were all dead in that first town. This is another one. All these things, like in the light of everything else, just make me just be like, what a dipshit. But all the women, they're like all laying on the ground. He's rolling up on his horse.
Where they're all in white at the very beginning of the movie.
He said, I said to these women, don't move. And he says it very mean on the commentary. He's like, I said to these women, don't move. I forgot to tell them that the shot was over. They laid there for 4 hours. They got sunstroke and had to go to the hospital, but they were afraid of me. They saw me as a god or a murderer.
Wow. Okay. That's something to brag. What a brag.
Yeah. This is not the boast you think it is, sir. He does say the sound designer was a guy named Gavira, who was a very humble man. He did all the movies in Mexico. He said it was all simple techniques like coconut shells for horses, cellophane crackling around for the fire stuff. He was very impressed with all this.
The sound design is very good, just like it was on Fondo and Lease. I think the sound design is like kind of unsettling at times, like the sound of the mosquitoes and stuff at the beginning.
He said he literally like came in with like just a bag of garbage, and that was like what he would use. Said the bandits' outfits and stuff, you're wondering why they're so wild. They rented costumes from an opera house. And so
it is a bizarre choice, what they're wearing in that scene.
Yeah, he said they had everything. And so what they wore was determined by what would fit them. So that's how they got that one. It's funny because there's a review about this later, but he says there's only one zoom and one close-up. Because of his background as a mime, he believes cinema is about the body movements. TV is about faces. Cinema is about bodies, which is interesting. But because there are some scenes where I'm definitely like, bro, you got to be zooming in or out here. But whatever. Anyway, he says the director of photography's name was Raphael Crocchidi.
Yeah, same as on Fondo and Lease.
And just like on Fondo and Lease, said he tied himself to him with a belt and held his waist and moved him around as if he were a machine. That is a quote. All camera movements were made by just repositioning the DP. So there you go. He enhanced, this was interesting, I thought, enhanced subliminal sounds and brought them forward. He talks about like with the goats in the background, he'll make the goat sounds very loud. He says that all of his sounds are really made afterwards. He says, I thought, quote, I don't want to make films with location sound. If we create sounds afterwards, then they are an artistic manifestation. I'm not shooting theater. There's too much theater in cinema. Cinema is not theater. The accidental sounds have a purpose. I only make actors talk in my films when I can't show what I want to show visually.
You mentioned earlier that he dubbed Mara's voice in with an older woman, but he does that a couple of times too. Like
he does it with everyone, he says.
He said, I think even with himself.
Yeah, he says he got a Mexican actor. He wanted a deeper voice with a Mexican accent.
Because the first master, the guy with the like mustache and the long hair, he's got a woman's voice. And then one of those old women in the scene we were talking about towards the end definitely has like a man's voice.
She was like a 20-year-old guy. He describes her as like El Topo's feminine personality. That's what she's supposed to be.
Oh, that's the woman in black. That's the woman in black. I'm talking about but yeah, she does have a man's voice too, but also one of the old women towards the end of the movie with the slave, the black guy. One of them has a really deep, like, man's voice.
Gotcha. He said, since I didn't have the means to make the bandits explode, I made them die very, very slowly. So it would be the opposite of classic Westerns.
Do guys usually explode in Westerns when they get shot?
I don't think so. So I guess his options were go complete opposite or like way overboard. And so Bandito number 1, who we talked about, he's the last one to die, and he gets shot. I just thought this was an interesting little fun fact. El Topo kills him with a rifle, and it's in a wide shot. You see like El Topo pull the gun up and shoot him, and the squib goes off or whatever, basically. He says that was forbidden at the time, that you couldn't fire a gun at somebody and they'll get shot in the same frame.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it prevented El Topo from getting on TV. That was part of. I'm sure that's not.
I mean, there's probably plenty in this movie that prevented it from getting on TV.
I literally noted that as I was writing it or typing it down. I was like, that is not the only reason El Topo did not get on TV, sir.
There's about 3 minutes of footage in this movie you could show on TV.
You know, he talks about with the bandits and everything. I also feature homosexual bandits, which was shocking for the times. The tough guys are homosexuals. It's really weird. They treat the priests as if they were ladies. Then he starts laughing. And then he says, people were not used to seeing homosexuals portrayed like that in films. Now, in every TV show, there is a lesbian, a homosexual, a transvestite, or a transsexual character. It's mandatory. So I think we must also feature necrophilia, bestiality, and nice things like that.
Oh, hard disagree.
Yeah.
On that one, Jodo.
How about that's a quote. I promise
that's from the commentary
later, but that's from the commentary, directly from the commentary. He said they couldn't find a blonde boy in Mexico, but luckily his assistant was there, and his name was Pablito, and he was the boss of, quote, gay power, and he was able to get the most beautiful homosexuals. That's what he told him. Yeah. I was going to save this one for later, but just know that between those two quotes I gave you, he also says this, quote, I had a friend who was a surrealist, and every time he attended a family dinner, he would rate the grilled chicken, and people would eat the grilled chicken where he'd previously inserted his penis. He was into bestiality, not with a live animal, though, but with grilled chicken.
Wow. Sir, this is a Wendy's.
It's so fucking like, what?
Why are you telling me this story?
And that's where I had literally noted to myself, man, if you let this guy talk long enough,
he's just going to say
crazy
some
shit.
He's just going to say some shit. Wow. Yeah. Jesus.
Anyway, I'll stop there. That's most of the behind the scenes stuff that you can get. He'll tell you like little stupid details about. Honestly, after a certain point of the movie, I stopped caring.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I did find interesting, again, if it's true, about El Topo was how the musical score was created. Because you'll see on the movie that the music is credited to Jodorowsky himself, although it says somebody else is orchestrated and arranged by. But Jodorowsky will fully admit, and has in multiple interviews, that he has no musical ability whatsoever, no musical training. And he claims to have only ever bought one record in his life, which is which is a record called Renaissance of the Celtic Harp by Alan Stivell, which came out in like the early 70s. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a guy playing a harp for the whole album. So I listened to it. It's kind of boring. But speaking to an interviewer in about 2009, so this was, I think that commentary was from 2007, if I remember, Gary, when this first hit DVD. So this would have been a little bit after that. So I'm not sure if he ever mentions this in the commentary. But speaking to an interviewer in 2009, he said, I found a very unique system because I didn't know anything about music. And then he goes on to explain his process, saying that he'd take a score from someone like Bach or Beethoven and cut it into small pieces in the shape of a pentagram, he says in one of the interviews. Then he randomly combined the pieces into a collage to create a new melody, which
of course he did.
And then another time he says, this is also still doing work on the music for El Topo. He says he called 21 of his friends to whom he had assigned 3 notes. So he'd call his friend and be like, all right, you're C, G, and well, I don't know music notes, but you know what I mean. But
D.
Yeah, that one. And then he would call them to come visit him. And then he would write down the notes in the order that they arrived. And then in another method, he said that he would take small sheets of paper that he'd written notes on, toss them in the air, and then just write them down in the order that they landed, like in the floor. And that's how he created the score for El Topo, which basically what I'm saying is that he created the music for El Topo in the most Jodorowsky way possible, which is in a way that makes no goddamn fucking sense.
And it's probably bullshit.
And it's probably a lie. It's probably all bullshit. So once El Topo was completed, Jodorowsky never even made an attempt to get it released in Mexico. He knew that wasn't going to happen, even though it was filmed there. And Mexico actually refused to submit it to the Cannes Film Festival as their entry. So Jodorowsky took the film canister under his arm and headed to New York City to find someone to release the film. And in New York was when he met a guy named Ben Barinholtz. So I want to talk a little bit about Barinholtz because, you know, we've talked about El Topo. We've talked about how this was the first midnight movie. And if anyone could be called the father of the midnight movie, I think it's Ben Barinholtz, more so than Alejandro Jodorowsky. Jodorowsky created this film. He is often referred to as the father of the midnight movie. Jodorowsky is, because El Topo was the first, but really it's Ben Barinholtz that we should be kind of praising here more so than Jodorowsky himself, I think. Barinholtz's impact on cult cinema and cinema in general really can't be understated. This is the guy who discovered and first showed the world the films of directors like the Coen brothers, David Lynch, John Sayles, Guy Madden. He showcased the first American presentation of John Woo's The Killer, introducing John Woo's action films to American audiences. He even has a small role as a zombie in George Romero's Dawn of the Dead because of his contributions to cult cinema. See, Barinholtz was the owner of a movie theater called the Elgin, which it's no longer there, unfortunately, but it used to be located in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. And under his ownership, the Elgin became known for its daring programming, which included revivals of classic Hollywood films, as well as experimental works by the likes of Kenneth Anger and Andy Warhol. So before he took ownership of the Elgin, Barinholtz managed and actually lived in a place called the Village Theater. It was there that he provided a home for the counterculture with appearances by the likes of Timothy Leary, Stokely Carmichael, Allen Ginsberg. And the Village also acted as a music venue, which saw performances from folks like The Who, Leonard Cohen, John Coltrane, Nina Simone. I mean, he had his finger on the pulse. But in 1968, the theater was purchased by legendary music promoter Bill Graham, who turned it into the Fillmore East. Bill Graham owned the Fillmore in San Francisco. He turned this one into the Fillmore East. And then when the Village closed, Barinholtz went to purchase the Elgin, which had originally opened way back in 1942. It was a first-run cinema when it opened, and then for several years, it was a Spanish-language-only cinema. And then when he was seeking to purchase the Elgin, Barinholtz approached this artist-run nonprofit in town called it's an organization called the Filmmakers Cooperative, and he suggested to them, kind of making his case that this theater would be a really good place to show experimental films and indie films, art house films. So the Filmmakers Cooperative agreed to help him, and they did so by giving him a copy of Andy Warhol's Chelsea Girls and $48 to get started.
Everything you need to start a movement.
Everything you need. Barinholtz first saw El Topo during a private screening at the Museum of Modern Art. And of that screening, he would say, half the audience walked out, but I was fascinated by it. I thought it was a film of its time. He attempted to purchase the American rights to the film, but when he was unable to do that, he persuaded El Topo's distributor, who was a music producer named Alan Douglas, to start previewing the film at midnights at the Elgin. You see, because of his experience running the Village Theater, Barinholtz was highly in tune with the counterculture. I mean, you heard that list of names that I mentioned that had performed or appeared at the Village Theater. In other words, he knew his audience. And he figured that the midnight showings during the week, actually 1 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, would attract hipsters and encourage a sense of personal discovery and stimulate word of mouth. And he was absolutely right. Like, he nailed it. And El Topo premiered at the Elgin. And these were, by all like official purposes, these were preview screenings, is what all of these were considered, preview screenings in New York. So it premiered, it had its first preview screening at the Elgin on December 18th, 1970, and it ran continuously 7 nights a week all the way through the end of June 1971.
Yeah, he says about that screening at the Elgin Theater, he said that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were there, and his sales, he called him his sales rep, and I think he's talking about this Alan Douglas. He just says Douglas, but Alan Douglas is probably who he's talking about. He says that he went to John and Yoko and said, "Can you introduce this film?" He said that nobody's going to stay and watch the movie unless you introduce it.
Well, John and Yoko were presenting some of their own short films. Correct?
Yeah. So it was there for them. They were screening some short films there, and he said, "So after your stuff, can you stay and introduce the movie?" And they did, and that worked. He said during that year that it played, basically a year, he said he went there a few times to see it. He said there was always a cloud of marijuana smoke. When I'd go to the stage to speak, people would put joints in my hands. I'd get on stage with a handful of them. I had suddenly become a mythical creature for them.
Yeah, it was. I mean, John Lennon's word. This is 1970. You know, like he is at the height of his fame. He basically told people, all these like counterculture kids who were there to see him and Yoko, he's like, "Oh, you got to see this movie. It's fantastic." I'm not sure if he'd seen it at that point. He definitely did see it several times there, but once it started playing, I mean, there was practically no advertisement at first, not even a poster. There was like a crudely written sign that an usher just put outside of the theater. That was the only advertisement they really had. And then for most of the run, there was never any mention of it in the press. And yet from January on, it was doing about $4,000 a week, which I did a calculation on that, and that's something like $34,000 a week in 2023 dollars. It had become this word of mouth sensation, kind of similarly to what would happen with Deep Throat a couple years later, where we're going to see El Topo would become the hip thing to do. Within 2 months of its release, limos were lined outside of the theater every night. Like, this movie became the must-see event for hipsters and celebrities alike. Like, if you wanted to seem cool, you needed to go see El Topo at the Elgin. And a cult around the movie was quickly building, aided in part by the Elgin's their management's tolerance of marijuana use in the balcony. They just kind of let it slide. And then people were seeing it over and over again. Well, this cult went public in late March of 1971 when critic Glenn O'Brien published an ecstatic article on the film in the Village Voice, beginning his article with the sentence, "It's midnight mass at the Elgin." He continued in his article saying of the audience, quote, "They've come to see the light, and the screen before them is illuminated by an abstract landscape of desert and sky, and the ritual begins again. Jodorowsky is here to confess. The young audience is here for communion." So they're building this up as like this big, I don't even know the words for it, like metaphysical experience, like religious experience that people have to, because this is that you got to think that's a big part of psychedelic culture in the late 60s and early 70s. All of these religions that we keep mentioning that Jodorowsky was dipping his toes in, Buddhism, Sufism, things like that. This is all a big part of the counterculture psychedelic movement of the late 60s and early 70s. It wasn't just Jodorowsky who was dipping his toes into this. He seems to have maybe gone a little bit further than some other people might have, but that's part of why this movie spoke to the counterculture in the way that it did. And that quote from the Village Voice sounds kind of absurd reading it now in 2023. But the truth is that El Topo did capture the counterculture's imagination like no other movie had, probably since Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. The Los Angeles Free Press, when they reviewed it, called it the greatest film ever made, which is a hell of a hyperbole. Changes, which is another alternative newspaper, called it a work of incomprehensible depth. And now, while these alternative newspapers and arts publications were raving about the film, more mainstream critics were less enthused. We mentioned Pauline Kael earlier, writing for The New Yorker. She called it commercialized surrealism. And then she went on in her review to say that Jodorowsky plays with symbols and ideas and enigmas so promiscuously that the confusion may be mistaken for depth. Which is pretty biting and very well written, as Pauline Kael tends to be.
Right.
Well, as the film's cult was growing, the New York Times, they kind of got wind of it, and they sent their resident film critic, Vincent Canby, to investigate the phenomenon, and he was unimpressed. After the screening, he wrote, quote, "Most of the people around me seemed to want to be told whether it was good or bad, if not what it really meant. It's difficult, especially at 3:00 in the morning, to admit that you've been conned. He concluded his review saying it would be a terrible mistake to show the movie at an earlier hour. So he hated it, basically. After this piece was published, the newspaper, the New York Times, got so many angry letters from fans of the film that they were compelled to print a defense of the film by their art critic, a guy named Peter Shedall, I guess is how you say his last name. It's got a lot of consonants in there, but so I think I'm spelling it correctly. I'll try to put these links to both of these reviews in the show notes if I can remember, because they're both still on the New York Times website. But the art critic called it a monumental work of filmic art. So you had people who loved it. You had people who hated it. You had people who thought it was a religious experience. You had people who thought it was incomprehensible garbage. So suffice to say, El Topo was a divisive film, and they have to imagine that 50 years worth of reviews since then have not changed that fact.
Oh, Justin, if some of these people probably stayed up just late, tried to get the full experience. They did the 1 a.m. screening of El Topo, and now they need a nap. Yeah, so as you can imagine, a lot of these are going to mention certain things in there, and I was even trying to avoid it, but there's some actually like decent stuff. So this first one, I'll credit where it's due. This is Eno is the name of this person. They may have given me the idea for what we called Jodorowsky there, because the review gives it 1 star. It says controversial rape scene, leaving a bad taste in my mouth. No matter if it was real or if he just said it because he's an edgelord, I was completely lost after that 1 hour mark, and I couldn't say what was going on, nor did I care. You can separate artist from art. It's true if the art is shit and the artist has a great personality. In this case, both are shit. Cool outfits, though.
I mean, the outfits are cool.
Yeah. El Tofu.
That's the Weird Al song.
El Topo could be a very cool looking Western image. I can give him that. BR says 1 star. I understand the role of gun violence and cultural violence in Westerns, and I see how Jodorowsky amplifies these experiences in his movies. Scenes like the gunman shooting the villagers in a line highlight his perspective on this kind of random and personal violence. This type of critique makes sense in all its excesses. What does not make any sense to me is having El Topo violently rape the first woman to have any kind of dialogue or introduction in the film. And not even 10 minutes before that, she is already groped and forced to kiss several men. What is the point of this kind of sexism? It serves no purpose. The commentary is unnecessary and jarring. I would not recommend this film despite its potential cinematographic or metaphorical benefits because of its gross disregard for women.
It's hard to argue against that one. I mean, a lot of times you read these somebody needs a nap reviews and it's like, oh, you're reaching. But I mean, the women in this movie are generally treated like crap, just like Lise was in Fondo and Lise.
That's true. Lucas puts it simply with his 1 star review and says, what if God smoked cannabis and were a misogynistic, pretentious fuck? Let's see. Matthew Nolet, half star, says, this film is a painfully average Western. Nothing to remember about it. I was mostly going to give this a 4 or 5 out of 10 and never think about it again. But after I found out what Jodorowsky did to his co-star, that man deserves to be imprisoned. I thought Herzog was an awful piece of shit for destroying a forest for a boring film. But what happened in the production of this film and is in the actual movie is hands down the worst thing a filmmaker has ever done on set, maybe even off set. And that's not even touching on the animal cruelty. Anyway, this was a really bland Western with a bit of research. It's the worst film I've ever witnessed. Fucking hell. I just wanted to watch an acclaimed 70s Western from a beloved filmmaker. He's a terrible piece of shit, and I refuse to watch anything else of his, both because I don't want to support someone like him, and this was just not any good, even not considering that one scene. It's just boring. No personality. Dialogue is really unnatural. Cinematography is really great on occasion, but it's just point and shoot for the most part.
Another hard one to argue against.
Yeah. Half star from Audrey, who says there's only one thing worse than a rapist who directs garbage, overwrought acid westerns for boomers who aged into QAnon shamans come 2017.
That's good.
Anna, 1 star. And notice I picked out some women here because I just felt like that was deserved. Anna gives it 1 star, says, I think Jodorowsky's comments defending his statement on raping Mara as a marketing sensationalist ploy are a sign of the problem with El Topo. It feels entirely sensationalist, shocking for the sake of shocking, gratifying violence and misogyny to sell a product. A regurgitation of symbolism to make it look smart only adds to the problem. It's one massive toxic masculinity ego trip. Nope.
These are some very well-written reviews.
I know.
Compared to some of the other ones that we get occasionally during this segment. Like, these are actually like very coherent, well-written reviews where you're like, all right, you're not just like some neckbeard behind a keyboard, just spouting off something. You're like, these are very thoughtful, or at least that one was. I mean, several of these have been.
I agree. Art Vandelay says,
George Costanza, huh?
He calls the title of this review is El Crapo, so at least I get one of those in there. As far as I can tell, El Crapo is little more than a couple hours of random killing. It makes a fistful of dollars seem Shakespearean by comparison. When people aren't being murdered, they're involved in all sorts of sexual deviance. Maybe that sort of thing was cutting edge in 1970. I see the IMDb trivia blurb list the weirdos who love this film. Kind of surprised, violence. I see the IMDb trivia blurb lists the weirdos who love this film. So what he's talking about is in the trivia, there is a list of all the celebrities who are supposedly fans of this. David Lynch, Marilyn Manson, John Lennon, blah, blah, blah. He said, kind of surprised violence porn enthusiast and foot fetishist Quentin Tarantino hasn't been mentioned yet. Since I don't drop acid or consume any legal or illegal pharmaceuticals, this movie's alleged charms are completely lost on me. Slappy McGee gave a half star. Says, the fuck? Not only pretentious as hell, which you can sometimes get around, but also contains that unneeded rape scene that was apparently real, as well as the real beating, both delivered by Jodorowsky to his actress on screen. That is unacceptable and a crime. But whatever, power. Lets you get away with anything. You also have a fully naked little boy for the first 30 minutes running around with Jodorowsky for no goddamn reason. Makes zero sense and is completely unnecessary. That's just vile stuff, man. What was this guy? Why is this guy not locked up? Again, probably power, the 70s, corruption, fucking disgusting shit. It's art though. Okay, I guess it's okay. And then in parentheses, he gives a little PS. It says, there are very few films that I would like to give a negative rating to. This is one of those films. If you love it, fine, whatever. You can fuck off or fight me, but move the fuck on. I got no time for you and your bullshit.
Wow. He got real angry there at the end.
Yeah, he definitely needs a nap. Zoblis says, half star, frothing at the mouth with misogynistic tract and an exercise in autofellatio by a delusional, reprehensible narcissist for the price of one. Human and animal welfare were clearly deemed of secondary importance during the production in favor of Jodorowsky's extremely creative and provocative artistic vision of himself as Jesus and of the women as ungrateful, unreliable creatures who only deserve to be sexually assaulted. Even if the stories of the writer-director star raping an actress and murdering 100 rabbits on set turn out to be untrue, I will still think of this as the most hateful and repulsive pile of film to ever be mistaken for high art. And we'll leave it with Melancholy. She gives it 1 star. And she says, after jerking himself off for the duration of a feature-length film, Jodorowsky looked at his beaten and misshapen dick and came up with the title for this movie. No, I did not enjoy watching a maniac massage his mole for 2 hours.
Oh, wow. So I guess I should ask, this is a good time to ask you, Gary. When you watch the film, we have our opinions on Jodorowsky as a person, which I think we have been pretty clear on, but what did you think of the movie when you watched it?
So I watched the movie before I read any notes or any other stuff about it. I wanted it to let it wash over me, as you said with Fondo Elise. I'm trying to give him this credit firsthand. I feel like this is going to be a really unpopular opinion and sound kind of crazy, but I liked Fondo Elise better the first time I watched it.
Really?
Like, I just didn't. This movie, I was into it for a minute, and then it's like, I don't know, it just starts to drag, like by the latter half. Like,
I think the second half drags. I've seen this movie like 3 times, and that second half always starts to lose me. The first half, where it's more of a Western, really, is somewhat compelling. But for me, that second half, where it goes on 20-30 minutes longer than it should.
Yeah, I would agree.
I feel like because you get to that part at about this movie's right at 2 hours and 5 minutes, and you get right at about 50 minutes or so when he gets taken, where he gets shot and gets taken by the people in the cave. And that last act really should have been more of like a third act instead of a second half, if that makes sense. It should have been a final third. Like, it should have been like 20 to 30 minutes long, not an hour long, which is what it is. So yeah, it always kind of loses me at that point.
I was into it. I mean, with the idea of like the basic, it's not the first, or maybe I'm sure it's not the first time anybody used it, but it's a often used concept of, you're fighting the masters or whatever. It's a video game. You just go through these different levels to get to the boss and fight them. That's a fun idea. I can always get behind that. But,
sure, yeah.
It just I don't know. It changes and it turns into something totally different. And I get it. It's him. So
there is compelling stuff in that last half. I think it just spins its wheels a little bit too much.
No, that's definitely it. It just for some reason, even during the commentary, honestly, like when I'd watch it with the commentary, I was just like, I don't know, like an hour and 15 in or so, you start to be like, if I have to hear one more of these fucking stories from him, or like if I just, and that's what the commentary, I mean, but it's just like, you're just watching and you're like, God dang, this movie is forever. Like, it is, I don't know. I did not get into it as much. I don't think it's like, as objectively looking at it as a movie, I don't think it's as horrible as a lot of what those reviews seem to think are. And I think a lot of the bad reviews didn't even give it the full chance. With that said, we've obviously already talked about that, good on you if that's your thing. Like, don't, I get it. I get not watching it or not wanting to finish it.
Sure. Yeah, I get that too. And I think a lot of people who don't like it, who are not disliking it because of Jodorowsky's behavior, or alleged behavior on set. I think if for the people who don't like it just for other reasons, as far as like judging the movie on its own, I think a lot of people don't like it because it doesn't make sense to them, and you could say that about Fondo and Elise too. But I think what it is that a lot of people, if you're trying to figure out what the meaning behind every piece of symbolism that Jodorowsky's throwing on screen, then I think you're going to end up frustrated. Because like I've said several times, I've been reading a lot of interviews with this guy over the last couple of weeks, and he will tell you like what every single thing in the film stands for. He's throwing in a lot of Christianity symbols. He's throwing in a lot of Buddhism, Sufism. He's throwing in all kinds of stuff. But does it all add up to a coherent message? Not really. Like, it doesn't. And even people who like the film, I think if you say that it is fully coherent, then you're lying to yourself. But I honestly don't think that's his goal in making this movie, because, like I said about Fondo and Elise, that movie was really about a journey, but just like this is. The first half of the movie is a guy walking across a desert. The same thing that with Fondo and Elise we're doing. It's about a journey to find enlightenment or to find oneself or whatever you want to call it. But I think for Jodorowsky, it is about the journey itself, not necessarily the destination. Because he even says in this, when he talked in one interview that I watched, I think it's on the Blu-ray, where he says this is about him trying to find himself, and he keeps finding nothing over and over and over, because it's really more about that journey itself. So if you're trying to like find meaning in that, I don't think you're going to find any. But speaking of the phenomenon that this movie became, because it's really hard to watch this now. Granted, we know things about what Jodorowsky has said that audiences that first saw this at the Elgin in 1970 obviously would not have known or heard, So we've got a little bit more context, but it is still kind of hard to watch this movie now and think, like, how did this become such a phenomenon in 1970? I mean, I know people were doing a lot of drugs, but like, how did this movie become such a phenomenon? And it certainly wasn't the story that did it, because the story is pretty straightforward.
It was sisters.
It was, I think, the images that he's putting on screen. Some of them are, I mean, I think it's a great looking movie. I really do. I think that cinematography wise, there are some striking images. There are some very shocking images on screen. There are all of them striking or beautiful or shocking or whatever you want to, whichever, pick and choose what shot you're talking about. They're all very distinctly Jodorowskyan, if that's a phrase. But I think the images are what drew people to it, and all of this religious symbolism, even if people in the audiences didn't know what it meant. Like they thought it was, profound because it was including all of this stuff. I think
he definitely always seems like he's throwing so much shit at a wall. Like it just, I mean, I do think that he has an idea of where he's going or what he's doing, but it does feel like it's a lot. Like you're trying to, obviously there's like the general who's like this powerful guy. Like there's that whole segment. There's the casual violence they have and El Topo dealing with that. But then there's the idea of the woman and that whole story. And then the whole latter half of the movie. And it's just like, I don't know. It feels like there's like he's just got so many things he wants to get out. And it's just, it's tough to follow everything.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're trying to follow it as just a straightforward narrative, I think, like I said, I think that's going to be very frustrating for you. One of my favorite quotes that I found during my research came from Roger Ebert in a review. It wasn't his original review of the movie, but he re-reviewed it in, I think it was in 2007, like when this movie finally came out on DVD. And in that review, he says, the film exists as an unforgettable experience, but not as a comprehensible one. And I think that's kind of a good summation of this movie to me, because I do think it's unforgettable. I think anyone who's seen this movie is not going to forget it. It's going to stick in your mind, whether you like it or not. But it is not comprehensible. But like all of his films, I think it does. You kind of said something along these lines. Maybe it might have been today. It might have been in our last episode, but it kind of reverberates with confidence. Like Jodorowsky fully believes with absolute certainty in what he is doing, and he is committed to his vision, no matter how wild it is. And that's, I mean, you can feel that in the film. Like this guy is committed to the bit, and whether you are receptive to it as an audience member or not, like this guy is definitely like, he feels like he knows what he's doing, and he feels like everything that he's putting on screen is very profound. Whether that comes across is debatable,
I mean, there was one quote from the commentary that I got here. I was going to save it for the end, but since you said that, it's like actually fits really perfectly here. But I mean, this is a quote that I would send to somebody, because I know people like this that I feel like would resonate with something like this. But it's a little long, but I'll read it real quick. He says, "In cinema, I cannot create an idea. It has to come to me. I plant seeds in my unconscious and go to sleep, and then images emerge. I don't have ideas. I wait for them to appear. It's a different approach. It's like the thirsty explorer in the desert, imploring the heavens for a little rain. At night, I plead for my unconscious to work so that I can have the idea that I need for the next day. And they come. What's the difference between what I do and what commercial artists do? In order to guarantee their investments, commercial artists look for a market. Let's make a film that satisfies the tastes of the social sector of this nation. Let's give them the product they want. So let's have some sneak previews, and we'll make changes according to the imbeciles' opinions. 40, 50, 60 imbeciles can change the ending of a movie because their vulgar taste must be satisfied. Commercial artists find an audience that already exists. There is another attitude, the attitude of a true creator, who little by little creates his own audience. Through the years, he imposes his way and creates his audience. Patience, perseverance, poverty. That's what you need. Patience, perseverance, poverty, honesty, authenticity. It's said that in film, opinions are like assholes. Do you know the rest of this quote? Opinions are like assholes.
Yep. Everybody's got one.
And I've also heard, and they all stink, right? Afterwards.
Yeah.
But imagine Jodorowsky saying it now, because here it is. It said that in film, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. Everybody shits feces and ideas. You must ignore them. When you make a film, you don't have to listen to anybody's opinion, not even that of the audience. A filmmaker has to do what he feels no matter what, even if people leave the theater. Even today, there are always 3 or 4 people who walk out of my films. They can't take them. I don't care. I've done what I wanted to do. Time will tell if what I did has value or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting quote, but he is very much like an artist with a vision, and some people are going to like that vision, some are not. I mean, you can watch El Topo, and for some people, this is sheer exploitation. You know, you've got violent, horrible images on screen. You've got him parading people with deformities, which if you hear him talk in interviews, he seems to have an affinity for, but it still feels a little exploitative, you know. And then some people are going to watch this and see something more profound. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's as profound as he thinks it is. I don't think it is exploitative at times. I think it's a film that welcomes analysis, but it doesn't really offer any solution. Like I said, if you try to figure it out, you're just going to be mad. It's a film that has layers and layers of meaning, but most of which you're only going to realize after Jodorowsky has explained them. And even then, his explanations don't always make a lot of sense. So I feel like sometimes if a filmmaker really has to explain a movie for you to enjoy it, then it's not doing a good job as a movie necessarily, you know. David Lynch famously does not explain his movies or explain the meaning behind some of the things in his movies, but his movies are also highly entertaining, whether you understand every moment of them or not, you know. So that's a fine line that I don't think that Jodorowsky is quite walking here. I mean, regardless, as an aesthetic experience, it is, I mean, at times it is intoxicating. There are some images in this that will stick with you forever. Whether you enjoy it or not is up to you. When the film was being advertised back in 1971, when it was being advertised like on Broadway, which we'll talk about in a second, one of the publicity taglines kind of sums it up. And this tagline is similar to what Roger Ebert wrote, but one of the official taglines on El Topo was, "What it all means isn't exactly clear, but you won't forget it." And I mean, that does kind of ring true.
Yeah, it's like there's a part of me that wants to appreciate all that part of it. There's some cool concepts that he includes and all that. I will say that you know, like I try to view the thing objectively. It is tough. Maybe I'm getting old and sentimental or something. And I mean, and I'm not talking about the rape here, but the animal scenes bother me. Like the amount of dead animals there. And I can't help but think like about, it sounds so sappy, but like there's actual fucking horses like that are alive hanging out there. Like, what must that horse be thinking right now?
Right.
You know, like, what the fuck is going on here? And and the kid walking through that shit, and I don't know, like it was like I was watching, I was like, what the fuck with this guy, man? That's a lot, and it's not fake. Like you can tell it's not fake. Like they're real dead things all over the place. I don't know why that bugged me, but then it is impossible now, I feel like, to watch it and not think about the other side of it with the accusation of rape, you know, like that's or the admission of rape or whatever you want to call that. Like It's disturbing, and especially when you throw that in and you can't help but start to notice all the other shit. Like, I mean, the way women are treated, like some of those reviews mentioned, the idea that this woman who, and by the way, I think I even saw an article that republished some of those lines from that interview, or maybe it's what you sent me. There was more he goes into about that woman having been raped before and all this.
Yeah, that's
stuff.
all in that same review. I just didn't want to read all that.
Yeah, it's just like fucking disturbing the way he talks about it. And I get, even if it's shock value, it's like, what the fuck with that?
Yeah.
And then you start to think about that this girl, like her character even, is just that she's a sex slave to this guy. And El Topo saves her, and the story is that she can't fend for herself or do anything, like find food or water,
because she's looking for the eggs in she's looking for the eggs in the sand and can't find them like he had, and can't get the water to come out of the stone like he had.
Yeah, and so, but once he gives it to her, then that's what she needs. It's fucking disturbing.
Yeah.
And then it's like, that's how he treats women. And then
that's in the movie, regardless of whether he actually assaulted her or not. That is in the movie as a story.
That is definitely part of the story. Yeah. And then that what she's able to have the power of a man like him is like, she's going to immediately use it to like seek more power and to be like, she's, evil, malevolent, to like, right. She's changing him to become like this killer, like he was out for revenge and stuff and doing some killing at first, but it was always bad guys. And now she's making him become this like murderer,
or he has to go fight the masters to like impress her, basically.
Yeah. It's all kind of just fucked. Like,
it is. It is. I think that this is a movie that, although there are some unpleasant things that we have to discuss when talking about it, like we said before, it was a phenomenon that can't be ignored, and it did start this whole midnight movie movement. So it is an important piece of history, even though I think today it doesn't hold up, partially because our viewing of it is jaded by kind of what we now know of its production. But also, I think that it's a very 1970 psychedelic hippie counterculture movie. And if you're not part of that culture, and we were nowhere near being born yet at that point, then it's not going to have the same effect on you. But at the time that it was playing in the theater, we mentioned him before, but one of the people who saw it was John Lennon. And John Lennon was a big fan of this movie. He saw it. Ben Barenholtz said he saw him there 3 or 4 times seeing this movie. So Lennon had recently returned to New York from France. And when he was in France, he and Yoko Ono had seen Viva la Muerta, which is a film that was directed by Jodorowsky's old friend and the co-founder of the Panic movement, Fernando Arrabal, who wrote Fondo and Lis, the play. So he had made a movie, and Lennon loved it. And Lennon actually tried to convince his manager, Alan Klein, to purchase the rights to Viva la Muerta. But after he saw El Topo, he changed his mind, and he then asked Klein to purchase Jodorowsky's film. So in June of that year, this is 1971, Klein's company, ABKCO, which is just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? I assume it's pronounced just by the letters, or Abcaco. How do you say? But it's Alan it's Alan and Barbara Klein Company. Barbara, I think, was his wife. That's what it stands for. But anyway, they bought the rights to El Topo, and when they did, they immediately withdrew it from the Elgin, where it was still selling out 7 nights a week.
Sure, they were happy about that.
I'm sure Ben Barenholtz was very happy about it. But the reason that Klein did this was because he had big plans for the film, and he had big plans for Jodorowsky, saying, my whole idea was to build him up as an international director. He thought he could be like the next Fellini or Kurosawa, and he signed Jodorowsky to an exclusive contract. Then a few months later, November 1971, Jodorowsky's already at work on the script for his next film. I'm not sure if it was The Holy Mountain or something else, because he talked about wanting to do like a pirate movie for a while. Like he had the idea to put Frank Zappa pirate movie, and he had all kinds of weird ideas. He's working on the script for his next movie, and Klein rented a block-long billboard off of Times Square that cost $60,000 a month. Now, if that is $60,000 a month in 1971 dollars, that would put it at like $439,000 today. So I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but $60,000 a month is the number that I read in Midnight Movies.
Jesus, that's big billboard, I guess.
It's a block long billboard, so it's it's big. But he plastered this billboard with Jodorowsky's name, and he leased a Broadway theater to give El Topo its official New York premiere. Because remember, those other midnight screenings were just preview screenings, right? Officially, so this is the official New York premiere. And as a side note, at around the time that this premiere happened, which is nearly a year after the film had opened at the Elgin, and El Topo and Ben Barenholtz had kind of invented the midnight movie as we know it, 5 other movie houses in Manhattan had already begun to show midnight movies. Like, this had already caught on less than a year later. And at the Elgin, specifically after they lost El Topo, they started showing other movies at midnight. Peter Bogdanovich's Targets, which features a late career appearance by Boris Karloff, that was their immediate follow-up. So when they lost El Topo, they started showing Targets. And then other theaters were showing films like Viva la Muerta was one of them. Equinox, I don't know if you've seen that, but it was co-directed by future ILM pioneer Dennis Muren. Romero's Night of the Living Dead was one of them, that because it had only opened a couple years earlier and it started getting midnight screenings. And Todd Browning's Freaks was another one. So I guess this is a good point, since we've just mentioned all these other midnight movies and cult movies. If you were to do a double feature with El Topo, which I don't see you doing, or if you just if somebody wanted something else to watch that was along these lines, what would you recommend, Gary, for further viewing?
Man, I saw somebody recommended, and I've only seen this once, but Beyond the Black Rainbow.
Panos Cosmatos, right? The guy who did Mandy?
Yeah, and I've only seen it like once, but
I've never seen that one.
That would work probably.
Yeah, I guess so. I've never seen it, so I can't really say. I mean, I've seen Mandy, but lots of times, but never Beyond the Black Rainbow.
I feel like anything by like Harmony Korine or something would probably work.
Yeah, I could see that. I kind of lean towards doing another acid Western, since this kind of was the first acid Western. I mentioned earlier there were a couple of others that were released around this same time. There's one that was directed by Robert Downey Sr. That came out, I think it was 1972, called Greaser's Palace. And then there was another one called Zachariah that came out in 1971. And usually if you read about like the acid Western, those are two that get mentioned a lot alongside El Topo. I haven't seen either of them, so I can't, vouch for them necessarily. One that I have seen that's a more modern day example of an acid Western, though, so I guess this would be my official choice, is Jim Jarmusch's Dead Man from 1995. Kind of about this guy, Johnny Depp, who encounters like just some weird stuff. Like it's almost like a journey into the afterlife. It's very trippy. It's shot in really great, like high contrast black and white. It's a really, really cool movie, I think. I like it. I enjoy it more than I enjoy El Topo personally, but Dead Man by Jim Jarmusch, I think would be my pick. Have you ever seen it?
Much about it. I don't think so. Don't think I've ever seen that. Yeah,
it's worth checking out. It's it's easy to find because Criterion released it years ago, so it might even be streaming on the Criterion channel. I know right now it's streaming on HBO Max, so you can find it pretty easily.
I just Googled, give me a movie like El Topo just to see what would happen. And
you specifically Googled that phrase? Give me a movie
like El Topo. One movie I see in a lot of these places is Naked Lunch, and I've honestly never seen that. But
David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch?
Yeah, people are like suggesting Naked Lunch, which
I don't see that. I don't see that correlation at all.
It came up in more than one list, so I'm
that's
just like,
so weird.
Weird.
I mean, other than it's weird, I don't see the correlation other than it being another kind of strange movie. But Naked Lunch is really outstanding.
Yeah, maybe it is just the weird thing. They're just like going for it. I don't know.
Yeah,
whatever. I just say another Jodorowsky movie.
Yeah, like The Holy Mountain or so, which is speaking of El Topo's success had kind of turned Jodorowsky into a phenomenon. He was a major figure of the counterculture, which of course did nothing to diminish his ego. He told the Los Angeles Free Press, "I want to be the Cecil B. DeMille of the underground."
Okay.
It wouldn't be long before he was rubbing elbows with some of the most important figures in the counterculture, not just John Lennon, but folks like Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, or Peter Gabriel, who he actually collaborated with on a Broadway show based on a concept album that Genesis had done, and it never got made, but the story behind it is pretty interesting. And then his notoriety and his increased, visibility, like people knew who he was finally, gave him the ability to get his next film made with a much higher budget than, a higher budget than both of his previous movies combined. I think he got about $1 million for his next film. And that $1 million was thanks to Alan Klein, John Lennon's manager, who now owned the rights to El Topo. And thanks to Alan Klein, Jodorowsky's next film, his most ambitious film yet, would be able to be made. And that film's going to be the subject of our next episode, which is 1973's The Holy Mountain. So that's it. Part 3 out of 4 of our Jodorowsky series. We're halfway through. Hopefully there are no more horrible stories behind the scenes on the next couple. I don't think there are, but I haven't dug far enough into their history to promise you that quite yet.
I can say that I honestly didn't know enough about the dude to know this last one, but yeah, pretty surprising. Quote, around El Topo, I had discovered Goddard. I really liked his Perrault Le Fou. I won't say it influenced me, but it had an effect on this scene when she says nothing, nothing, nothing. This scene might make us think about Goddard, but I am nothing like Goddard. He is a great intellectual, and I am not. Goddard has 1 testicle. I have 3. Those 3 are intellect, emotion, and libido.
He named his 3 balls.
I guess. He's this guy. I did like this quote. In my film, I eliminated the concept of good and evil. The bandits redeem themselves, or the good guys become bad. There is no clear distinction between good and evil. That is an American sickness. All of the American film books say, in the first 10 pages of the script, you must introduce the bad guy. It's all based on a bad guy. The bad guy is a mere abstraction. Nobody is absolutely bad. And if there is someone who is absolutely evil, we're all to blame for their existence.
How about this one? I think there are multiple influences in the film, talking about El Topo. I have them all, the influence of all the books I've read and all the films I've seen, of all the winds that have blown against my skin, of all the stars that have exploded during my lifetime, of each manifestation of the non-manifested, of each flea that shit on me, especially a flea I met in 1945. It shit on me in such an incredible way that it changed my life. I'm sure that flea is in my film.
Oh my God. The general is metaphorically El Topo's father. You must confront and castrate him. BRB, I got to call my dad.
Oh, Lord. Oh, man. I don't know what else to say about this guy, but I guess we'll figure it out with the Holy Mountain, because we are on this journey, Gary. We've had 2 more episodes, and then we'll move on to something a little more fun. Maybe, or at least a little less difficult, I guess, is a better way to say it, because I'm still, I still enjoy doing the research and presenting the information, even when the information is not pleasant. But shit, I listen to true crime podcast all day long, and that's not pleasant. But I
don't expect that we're only going to run into good people. I mean, we dropped some names in the discussion with Todd when he was letting us know that he wasn't going to be a part of this series anymore, which again we respect. But I mean, part of what our thing is that there are gonna be people at some point, that are shit. Here's another quote from the commentary that he just drops casually at a certain point. 20,000 years ago, the female goddess was kicked out of religion, and the hunters introduced the male god. It's been 5,000 years since the Bible has reigned, where the woman is considered a demon, starting with Eve and Lilith. Women have to stop playing these 4 parts they've been given: whore, mother, saint, and dumb. It's like, I'm not going to win anybody over.
Nope, you are not, sir. Oh Lord. So
I just now the part that I feel freed on is, and I hate saying it like just happily, like I'm just saying at the cost of everything else. It's just like, one thing I'm not going to feel sorry for is giving this guy shit.
Yeah.
Because, like we had this conversation, I feel like last time where we were like, oh, don't act like your opinion's absolute. You could have like, I want to present this in a balanced way. And now to be like, if I can crack a joke at this guy's expense, I'm going to do it. Like, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
he nothing I say is ever going to impact his ego. He is very sure of himself.
He sure is.
And very crazy.
He sure is. Well, that's it for this episode, I guess. Gary, we want to let our listeners know where you can be found on the internet.
Yeah, I am at This Is Gary Horn, and on all the socials at that. You can also find the wrestling company I work with at NWA, at TIPW Show is my wrestling podcast, and that's it.
And I'm at Justin_Bishop. Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. You can also find the show at cinema_shock. That's on Instagram, Twitter. Find us on Facebook. Find us on Discord or at cinemashock.net. Like, rate, and review, all that good stuff. And until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.